I live in a cabin on about 50 acres of fields and woods with my mom. We'd been enjoying a day of sitting on our asses and watching television. However, I had to mow my grandmother's yard this afternoon. I told my mom that I had a yard to mow today, and it went as follows. "It's cooler outside. I guess it's a good time to get off my ass," I said. "Or you could just call and tell her you'll do that tomorrow," replied my mom. "Nah, I'll just get my things together and go," and proceed to grab my headphones, e-cigarette, etc. I headed down the driveway, topped the hill, and lo and behold, there was at least 20 highway patrol cars in the middle of my field and about 70 feet from my truck. I just assumed that our neighbor who had a history of cutting up had just gotten himself in trouble with the law over drugs or something. When I pulled out of the gate, I told the local cops that I'm the landowner and asked if everything was alright. He said, "It's going to be," whatever that means. On the way to my grandmother's house, I called my mom and I said, "I don't know any way to put this other than, there are like 100 cops in our field." She said that she's on the way to check it out. I called her a few times, with no answer, so I assumed that she was talking to the cops or something. I knew she'd be safe with all of the cops, so I went ahead and started mowing the grass. Plus, my grandmother is only a couple of miles down the road. When I was about halfway done mowing, she called me and said that the troopers had nothing to say, but one of the local cops that she knew said that it was a guy who was wanted in Texas for shooting 3 people, killing 2 and injuring 1. The guy drove into our field and shot himself after being confronted/surrounded by troopers. When I was done mowing, I headed home to pick her up, and we drove back to talk to the last of the few troopers. I told them that I'm the property owner, and asked if it was all clear, and if everything was safe now. They said they had just moved the body and car out, so it's clear. I said, "Wow, all the way from Texas, huh? Well, be safe. Thanks." We drove over to the site after the troopers left. Right behind our old pecan tree was a bunch of tire treads and a giant bloody spot in the grass. We're still in a state of, what the fuck? Going by the press conference we just watched as I typed this guy shot himself as I was going up the driveway. I didn't even hear the gunshot or sirens, but I remember having my radio turned up. In the description you can find a link to a couple of the news articles pertaining to the story. This is a story about the most disturbing thing that has ever happened to me while delivering pizzas in high school. There are a few others, but this one stands out above the rest. I was 16 years old and just got my license, so I needed a job to pay for a car. A few of my good friends were working at a local pizza place in a town close to my house, so I decided to apply and got the job without an interview because they were so short-staffed. They also hired me as a delivery driver without ever checking to see if I had a driver's license. I did, but I always thought that was funny. About a month or 2 later, we were having a really busy night, and I was sent off to a delivery in a fairly nice part of town in the next city over. This was before GPS was common, and not very reliable, so we still used maps to locate houses. This particular house was in a new development, so it wasn't listed in any of our directories, but my boss thought he knew where it was and gave me directions. He was way off, so I had to call the house for directions. And this is where things got weird. The conversation on the phone was normal. I told the man I was near his house, but needed directions because the ones I was given weren't accurate. He was very understanding and told me how to get there from the road I was on. A few minutes later, I pull into his driveway and instantly get a bad feeling. He was a man in his early 50s or 60s and was standing in the middle of his driveway with a creepy, satisfied smile on his face and wearing a maroon silk bathrobe. I got out of my car and gave him his 10-inch Hawaiian pizza, which costed $10.95 at the time. He gave me a $20 bill and told me to keep the change. Considering I was on a late night delivery and had to call the customer for directions, I wasn't expecting anything for a tip, let alone almost $10. I drove away from the delivery thinking that something was off, but I got a great tip, so I was happy. I lit up a smoke and turned on my radio when I felt my phone vibrate. It was the number from the house I was just at. I got nervous thinking it was going to be a complaint or something, because why else would someone call the delivery guy after he delivered your food? My blood curdled at the words that came out of his mouth. "Do you want to come back over and get the knife?" he said. Or at least that's what I heard. I said nothing and hung up the phone and drove back to work as fast as I could. I also called one of my friends who was working there at the time and told him what happened. On the 5-minute ride back to work, he called me at least 3 or 4 times. For some reason, I actually answered one of the calls, and he asked me if I wanted to come back after I get off work and spend the night. I was greeted at work by laughter from pretty much everyone working that night. Everyone thought I was either faking or overreacting. Then I got another call on my phone from the same guy. I showed my manager while the phone was ringing and let it go to voicemail. That's when he decided to call the restaurant. Once this happened, my manager realized that this was probably a serious situation and answered the phone pretending to be me. He had a very short conversation with the guy, and at the end he told him he is not allowed to do business with us anymore and we are blocking his number. When my boss hung up the phone, his face was pure white and looked like he could barely comprehend what had just happened. I asked him what the guy said, but my boss would not repeat the words that came out of his mouth. I was so paranoid that I had to stay with a friend that night instead of going home. Guess who called me a couple hours later? Yeah, he called. At least 10 times. For at least a week or 2, I was living in fear of being kidnapped. I was always looking at the people or cars that were around me, being paranoid that I was being watched or followed. It's possible that I was right, because I started getting phone calls again. This is when I decided it was time to call the cops and put an end to this. I explained everything to the officer, and he assured me that he would take care of the situation. Turns out, the cop did nothing. I live in a low-crime town with less than 20,000 people. This guy didn't have anything else to do that day except write some speeding tickets during the afternoon, then some DWIs in the evening. The calls kept coming, and my paranoia grew. This needed to stop, so I told my boss that things hadn't improved, and he called the cops himself. An officer came down to the restaurant and took down our statements. Unlike the other officer, this man seemed visibly shaken and angered by the events that had happened. He promised me that he would personally handle the situation and that I didn't have to worry anymore. This police officer followed up on what he said, and I never heard from the creep again. I kept that same job for 3 years and had nothing but great times there. This happened to me about 2 years ago. It was the last day of school, and I was really looking forward to summer vacation. My cousin, Tana, invited me over to stay the night. Being the bored, anxious kid I was, I said yes and that I would be there in an hour. Finally, it was time to go to Tana's, and I was excited. As usual, my dad left me with a kiss on the head and, no foolishness. I responded with my usual giggle and, "Don't worry, Dad." I walked up the stairs to the front porch, and I was greeted by my cousin, giving me a big bear hug. This wasn't the first time that she had nearly knocked me down with a hug. We never really see each other that much. I reply with a simple, "Hey," followed by a wave. As we walk into the house, I see my aunt and uncle, and I give them both hugs. We head to Tana's room and play Xbox, watch a few movies, and eat some junk. It was around 10:30 p.m. when we decided we wanted to try some prank calls, and as we were getting ready for our first victim, we heard what sounded like the outer front door swing open and hit the side of the house. Keep in mind that this is definitely not unusual, but it still scared the shit out of us. I gripped onto Tana's arm and said, "Why does it do that?" in a shaky voice. She said that it's just from the wind. So, not thinking too much of it, we just went back to watching TV. 11:25 p.m. rolled around, and we heard footsteps stomping on the stairs. That's when Tana and I lost our shit and ran to her brother's room, got all the bats that we could find, and ran back to Tana's room. She finally worked up the guts to look through the blinds. When she did, she turned to me with sheer terror in her eyes and whimpered, "He's out there." I looked at her like she was crazy and asked, "Tana, what the fuck? This isn't funny. Who's out there?" Then, all of a sudden, Tana broke into a sob and said, "You think I'm lying? I know what I saw." I was so dumbstruck that I couldn't even focus on what was happening, so we just went back to her bed and laid there with all the bats, and within the next 15 minutes, the noises stopped. What got me the most about this story is that when I woke up the next day, we went to the kitchen and asked Tana's mom about it, and to our shock she said, "I didn't hear anything. I slept like a baby last night." Tana and I stared blankly at each other in disbelief. I don't know if Tana and I are crazy or not, but I'm sure of what I heard, and so is she. Every time this story gets brought up, Tana and I brush it off and try to change the subject. I remember that Tana was the one looking through the blinds, not me. And that leads to the question that pops in my head every day. If I had looked, would I have seen something? I live in a very rural, mountainous area of California, and at the time I was working as a cook in a restaurant/bar. I was 24, and not in the best place financially at the time, so I had been borrowing my uncle's car to drive to and from work. I worked 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. I know everyone in this area well, and I don't have a single enemy. I get along with everyone. One night I had gotten done closing up the kitchen, and decided to have a beer before going home. The bartender was talking to a fellow community member and trying to get him to go home. He was too drunk for his own good. There were some out-of-towners that weren't too fond of the locals' demeanor, and it seemed like it was getting intense between them. I just saw it as a local that I knew being annoyingly drunk, but perfectly harmless. I had my beer and went out and got in the car. I could see inside the bar and spotted the local drunk, completely smashed. I felt bad for not offering him a ride, but was tired from work and told myself he'd be okay. I drive away. Mind you, there's no street lamps, no buildings. It's in the middle of nowhere. Pitch black. Quiet. I realize about a mile from the bar that I should turn around and offer the local a ride home. He didn't live far, and it wouldn't be far out of my way to do so. I turn around at a muddy turnout and go back. I get to the bar, and I basically was short with the local and told him that I would pick him up in the morning and he could get his truck, sober, and that I'll give him a ride home tonight. I was 24 at the time, and a small-built female. He was a smaller-built 35-ish looking male. I knew this guy had hit on me in the past, but I assumed he was just a 35-year-old weirdo who was lonely. I always just shrugged off his advances. Within a couple minutes of reasoning, he finally hopped in my car and I took off, driving towards his house, about 5 miles away on winding mountain roads. I didn't notice anything really at first. He seemed drunk, quiet, mumbly. But not too long into our drive, he starts saying thank you and how nice I am for helping him out. I say the usual, "Of course, no problem." I couldn't let him be there knowing full well that he wasn't able to drive. This is where I start getting creeped out. I make a turn onto the road he lives on. It's a long road, not many houses. All of the driveways are about a mile or two long, so you don't see any houses. He gets really quiet, and it's dark in the car. I can't see him really well. I notice him look at me though. I could see the reflection of his eyes from the dim lights on the radio. This is something I remember vividly. His eyes gleaming kind of green from the lights on the radio knobs. He was just looking at me. I, without returning his gaze, said, "What's up? Why are you looking at me like that?" He says to me, "You're so pretty. and I never get this chance to be alone with you." I shrugged it off, trying to play it cool, although I started regretting my decision. All of a sudden, he reaches over to me while I'm driving and tries to put his hand, I'm assuming, on my breast, but instead his hand lands on my shoulder/neck area. I start yelling at him to stop. I slam on my brakes in the middle of the road. No one is behind me. There's no one for miles. And I scream at him to get out of my car, now. And I repeat it over and over. At this point, I had my hands off the wheel and I was trying to push him out of my car. I had leaned over and opened the car door. I had never, in my life, realized my own strength. My own weak strength. This 30-something-year-old male was not budging against me. I noticed him laughing. A really sloppy laugh. He said, "You and I both know no one is around." I said to him, "We just left the bar. At least 5 people know where I'm going. Please stop. Here's a flashlight. Walk on home. I'm done with you tonight." He's quiet for a minute before saying, "I don't feel like walking much." The way he said it scared the living shit out of me. I started to scream. Not like a horse scream, but like an ear-piercing scream. I knew the scream was strong and loud, and I had even hurt my own ears, just hoping that someone had their windows open enough off in the woods. But nothing happened. We struggled for what felt like minutes as he kept trying to come at me. This entire time he was kind of laughing. He was drunk, so that was probably my only advantage. I was not. He was sloppy and trying to attack me for whatever reason. I pushed on him like I had never pushed on anything in my life. I pushed so hard that I felt my arms burning with pain. When he finally gets out of my car, I slam on the gas, not even bothering with the door. Remember, I was heading down a long-ass road in the middle of nowhere, and not on my road. It's a dead-end road after 20 miles, so I kept driving down this road I know well, knowing fully well that I will need to stop and turn around. But this road is like 1.5 lanes wide, and there's hardly any turnouts. When I finally do, I turn around fast and in someone's dirt driveway, afraid of the car being still for even a second. I take off driving, knowing he'll be up ahead any second. I never see him. I never see him again. He was a local I'd known for years and saw frequently. I don't know if he took off to another area from embarrassment or what, but I never saw him again. I arrived home, shaking, red, scratched, and out of breath. My boyfriend and our friend were at home playing Jenga, and I told them immediately. And they knew who it was too, and they went out to try to find him. And like I said, I never saw him again, and that was about a month ago. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to yourmaker6260@gmail.com. I hope everyone's having a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. And got the job without having an interview because they were so short.